Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for May 15th, 2024. Tomorrow, President Vladimir Putin will be arriving in Beijing for a series of meetings with his Chinese counterpart, Xi Jinping. The issues they're going to be discussing, according to a printout provided by the Russians, include, quote, the Russia-China overarching partnership and strategic cooperation, unquote. This has been an ongoing theme of the two countries as they're at the center of the development of the BRICS as an alternative to the Western collapsing IMF system. And they're involved in establishing a strategic partnership to defend the sovereignty of all nations against the unipolar order, which is insisting on maintaining a neo-colonial status, which means that nations of the global south have to remain subordinate to the demands of the City of London and Wall Street. Now, it also shows that the trip by the sad-faced American Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, to Beijing for his meetings with Xi Jinping was a failure. It was a Kissingerian attempt to split Russia from China using a carrot and stick approach. The carrots were the offer for favorable trade terms, but at the same time, the stick was sanctions, tariffs, actions such as the shutting down of TikTok and so on. The idea being that the US is saying to the Chinese, you let us dictate the terms for you and Russia, and in return, we'll give you a few goodies. If not, we'll take away everything. Now, it didn't work. It was another Blinken failure, and as we can see by the potential for this meeting coming up between Putin and Xi Jinping. Now, forgive me for using a crude and somewhat disgusting image for the Blinken mission, but you should know that for 5 decades, I've been opposed to the work of Henry Kissinger with his so-called balance of power geopolitical doctrine dictated by the City of London and Chatham House. However, let me say about Mr. Blinken, you are no Henry Kissinger. You can't even carry his jockstrap. Now, Blinken is sort of like a salesman for the Titanic as the ship is moving toward the bottom of the ocean, still insisting, well, the ship is in sound shape, it's good shape, we want you to get on it. But the system of the unipolar order is sinking fast. Now, then there's the third country that's central to the BRICS, which is India, which has also been extensively targeted for Anglo-American operations. Again, the same kind of thing, to split India away from its partnership with Russia and to prevent India and China from moving closer together. Well, again, that seems to be a failure. The idea that the US will offer India weapons to replace Russia is a non-starter. The trade between Russia and India is expanding dramatically, and especially in terms of Russian oil and energy supplies, as well as weapons. And furthermore, the India-China partnership seems to be growing. China just sent a new ambassador to India, and his message is that Xi and Modi, quote, have agreed that China and India are cooperation partners and not competitors, unquote. He said in his announcement, we have reached a common understanding to work for each other's development opportunities. And he concluded by quoting President Xi, quote, if China and India speak with one voice, the whole world will listen. If both countries join hands, the whole world will pay attention, unquote. China has now become India's largest trading partner, and that's only going to increase in the future. So what we're seeing is the BRICS, with the central relationship, that of India, China, and Russia, the BRICS are on the move. Meanwhile, in the transatlantic, there's an effort to hype up NATO to stop the non-existent Russian threat and to prepare for a split of Taiwan from China, which would probably lead to a war between the US and China. Now we're seeing how stupid that would be by looking at the collapse of the Ukrainian army, in spite of the massive transfer of money and weapons to Ukraine by the West, including another $61 billion to Ukraine from the United States. The Ukrainian army is crumbling. It's facing a defeat in the Kharkiv Oblast. Now, while this Russian offensive is making enormous headway, Blinken showed up in Kiev to reassert America's permanent alliance with the Ukrainians. And how did he do it? He was playing guitar in an underground dive bar in Kiev. And the message he gave was, the U.S. is still with you. You keep fighting and dying, and we'll keep giving you money and weapons. Now, his marching orders were probably dictated to him through the same British networks that dictated Kissinger's policy. And we know that from the statements by British Defense Minister Grant Shapps. He said, London will not support a deal between Moscow and Kiev to end the war. The same message that Boris Johnson brought in April 2022 when he said, we will not support an end of the war. Instead, we'll give you more weapons. Well, that's what Shapps is saying. Now, more importantly, he reiterated this point that all of them are making, that Russia must not be allowed to win the war, because he said, if it does, you'll be fighting next in Western Europe. Now, he added that the British say it's acceptable for the Ukrainians to use British weapons to strike Russian territory. And he bragged about British leadership in pushing the proxy war. Here's his exact comment, quote, it is very, very important that the US follow the UK lead, unquote. Now, this makes the point that Lyndon LaRouche has always made about the relationship between the US and London. As London ceased to be the dominant military power in the world, and the US took over that role, filling in for the British as the controllers of a global empire, the British have dictated the policy to the United States. And what LaRouche said is that the US has become a dumb giant on a British leash. Well, this is clear in terms of the Ukraine situation, where the British sabotaged the potential for an end to the war in the first month. It's clear in terms of the British strategy for expanding NATO eastward. And there's more of this British idiocy being stated by the pint-sized Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, who told a gathering, if Putin isn't stopped in Ukraine, you might be next. This was at a meeting of Western nations. He accused Russia, among other things, of threatening, quote, our energy security by cutting off gas supplies to the West. There's only one problem. This is a complete and total lie. It was NATO and the European Union which banned Russian energy supplies. And it was the US which sabotaged the Nord Stream pipeline. So the idea that Russia has somehow cut off oil supplies, that's why the prices are up, that's the cause of inflation, and so on. Sunak is just repeating the justification points for war. The point here is that the British don't let truth get in the way of developing a justification to go to war. And that's what the military-industrial complex does. They create pretexts, false flags, and then pump the money in, use the soldiers, destroy nations. For what purpose? To protect the power of the unipolar order. Now, this is what Blair and MI6 did to get the US to go into Iraq against Saddam Hussein. This is what Cameron and MI6 did in creating the pretext for the bombing and destruction of Libya, as well as Syria. Now, will the US continue to follow these policies? Well, if you look at the bipartisan consensus of morons in the Congress, it's clear they are. Which means what? Which means that the people have to step forward. Most people that I know of in the United States don't want wars and more debt and higher taxes. but they're not willing to denounce the idiots who are pushing these wars, which then are an excuse for higher taxes in order to cover growing debt. This is nonsensical. I'll be discussing this today with Helga Zepp-LaRouche in our weekly discussion, our weekly dialogue, and you can send us your questions to questions@schillerinstitute.org. And I hope I'll see you this afternoon.